Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast.
So today we've invited along Peter Gill, who has been teaching something called focusing for over 20 years. He's one of the UK's foremost focusing teachers. And prior to this, he spent a decade practising and teaching meditation. So Peter has written a book, The Way of Curiosity, which was published earlier this year, and is qualified with the International Focusing Institute and the British Focusing Association. I'm really pleased to have you along, Peter. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Hello, Peter. Yeah, very pleased to meet you. Well, I am one of those people who will say, I thought I knew what focusing is. What do you mean by focusing?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, isn't it? It's actually not, I'll say it's not the best word to describe what it's about. I mean, often people must think of it when they hear it, like, oh, focusing, I must be more focused and I must be more, like get more narrowed down on my tasks, or and that's the kind of popular use of it. But in the kind of, let's say, the well-being and therapeutic world, focusing, is a method that is really more about slowing down, in fact, and listening to the body, listening to what the body knows, or listening beneath our thoughts and our kind of usual rumination. Like, what does a body know about our life? What is and I use a body in a broad sense, really, but what is there beyond just our normal thoughts and kind of conceptual ideas? There is a different kind of knowing. You could call it intuition, maybe. You could call it kind of gut knowing. Focusing points to that, really, which many of us have naturally, but it's a method that really helps us to access that, which can then help us to access work with all sorts of issues and problems in our life. So broadly, I just say listening to the body. That's what I often say, and that's kind of, most people get it when I say that. Yeah, does that make sense?
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm sure it makes sense. Not necessarily to me, but I'm sure it makes sense. In my state of ignorance, I would be thinking, well, that sounds a bit like meditation. So could you tell us what it involves?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in some ways, it's similar to meditation in the sense of we might slow down and we might kind of pay attention. That's where it crosses over with mindfulness and meditation a lot. There is a kind of, what's happening? What's happening right now? But the focusing process involves more than just that act. I mean, there are lots of different ways of doing focusing, but often you're doing it with somebody else. So you're speaking about your experience while someone is listening to you, and you're sort of trying to describe what you notice in your inner experience, in your feelings and body, and someone else is listening. And that really takes it into a very different realm than meditation for me. And the other thing is, meditation is often a bit like, some people describe meditation as, well, you notice things and you let them go. You notice things and you let them go. Focusing, you're really entering a conversation with what you notice. So you might get a feeling in your body, or a trigger, or a part of you getting anxious. And then you, instead of just naming it and letting it go, you actually turn towards it and be curious about it and listen. Oh, what actually is going on here? So that, I mean, some meditations can be a bit like that. So they can be closer or further away, depending on how you do the practices. But that for me, that describes some of the difference there. Yeah, like we're entering into a real dialogue with what our body knows. Yeah.
Thank you. So, as a psychotherapist who, for quite a long time, I worked with people using a couch, and I suppose I would be saying something a bit similar to them. Notice what's going on in your mind. I probably wouldn't put so much stress on noticing what's going on in the body. So, to help me refine my ideas, could you talk us through an example?
Yeah. I mean, Dan, I think what the way you ask that is important, because it isn't just what's happening in the mind. There is this something that's happening below the surface. I mean, I could share an example, and this is an example from my book. And this is from some time ago, but it felt very relevant and important. At that time, I'd just broken up with a long-term girlfriend, and I was feeling bad, and all I knew is I felt bad, and then I was kind of caught in also lots of thoughts about, oh, maybe I did something wrong and terrible, and I'm such a bad person, or they're such a bad person, all that kind of stuff we get caught in. And I thought, okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to sit down. I was on a bench actually in a park. I'm going to sit down on this bench. I'm going to notice what I'm feeling in my body, and there was all I could feel. There was something there that didn't feel good. And normally, of course, when we don't feel good, we don't want to feel it. We would, go and do something else, distract ourselves. But I decided, no, I'll pay attention to it. And at first, there was this kind of, I knew it was like, sad, is it sad? And I kind of searched for words. This is so much how the focusing technique works. You find ways of describing. What is it? What do I feel in there? Is it sad? Like, well, it kind of gets it. Not really sad, is it? And I just stayed with it. And this must have been over a period of, 10, 15 minutes, very quietly listening, trying to find a way of describing it. And eventually what came to me wasn't actually something in the body, or wasn't just body. It was an image, like a symbol. And this image of a wolf came, and this wolf was on a top of like a landscape, and it was just howling and howling and howling. And I was like, oh, right, that's how I feel. That, like, I didn't know that until I actually paused and stopped, and that was already a real gift. Like, okay, that's what part of me's feeling, And then I realised this wolf was entirely unself-conscious. It sounds like a funny thing to say, really, but it wasn't like criticising itself for what it was feeling, or like animals do. They just do their thing, don't they? And I suddenly thought, wow, if I just allow myself to do that, what would that be like? And then this kind of emotion came out. It's like, right, that's what I needed to do. It's like my body was telling me what it needed to do, and I paid attention and I listened. And it wasn't what I thought about the situation. I could have told you 20 reasons or things about what I thought about why I'd broken up or how bad it was, but that kind of release in the body was very important and essential. I've had many experiences like that around grief. It's a very typical thing that, where we can't think ourselves out of. We have to let our body do its process. So that came from really slowing down and just being curious and describing and waiting and listening, and then something comes that isn't conceptual. I could never have thought up in advance, even though it makes sense. If you hear it, I'm sure it makes sense as an image. But yeah, so the body, if you like, I gave a chance for the body to speak to me, or my being to speak to me, my deeper being, and and that kind of process is quite sort of typical in focusing, where we start off with something vague and uneasy or hard to put into words, and it becomes clearer. And we get a message or some kind of teaching. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It's really helpful to hear that example, Peter, because one of the reasons, as I said to you when we met before, the reasons that I wanted to invite you on was because I'm a sensory motor psychotherapist, and focusing is part of that.
Yes,
informs that practice, that idea that you focus in on what's there and then try and get more familiar with what's there, and perhaps a new understanding of it. But as you were talking, I was also reminded of internal family systems, and the idea that you somehow managed to create some space within you that it's easy to get caught up in the grief, for instance, and feel that is you. But by actually focusing in on something, paradoxically, by looking at it more closely, we somehow create some sense of objectivity or distance that might not be there otherwise.
Yes, yeah. I think there is a lot of crossover with that, the way it works in internally family systems, where there is a bit of space. I mean, this is a really key, for me, a very key piece of focusing practice, is sort of this capacity to be curious about what's happening, but not falling into it or not getting overwhelmed by it. It's not wrong for that to happen, but we often get stuck at that stage. We just feel anxious or overwhelmed by anxiety, or we just get stuck in grief. But focusing allows us to get a bit of space where we can become a listener to ourselves, and that's like a little bit of space between you and it really helps. Well, it's essential, I would say, to most processes. And it's shared across processes. Like it will crop up in mindfulness, it will crop up in internal family systems and focusing.
Thank you, Peter. That's a very powerful example you've given us there. But you mentioned this as being an individual process, whereas I thought earlier, did you say that you might often be doing it with somebody else?
I did, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's good. You've noticed that. Yeah, that's right. The example I gave was me on my own, and that's one way which you can do it. I mean, I like to describe it like this: at least three or four ways you can sort of practice focusing. One is just sort of intuitively and naturally. There are people who just do this without even calling it that. And many people have come to my courses and said, "Oh, actually, I've been doing this for ages already." Because it's just a way in which they're in touch with themselves that's helpful. But then, 50% of the people, or 75, haven't. So yeah, there are forms so that you can do it on your own. You can talk yourself through the process, a bit like a kind of a meditation. You might guide yourself through a process, but you can also do it in a pair practice, which is the main way I teach it and the main way I practice it. And that's really beautiful because it's this peer relationship. So no one's the expert. And it's just keeping each other company. One person is describing what they're noticing, the other person's listening without any agenda or without any interrupting or kind of questioning or commenting. And, oh, it's terrible. It happened to me too. Some things that can sometimes be okay, but often be a bit hard when we're going somewhere vulnerable. Just listening. And so that dyad practice is really a main way of practicing it. And then, it shows up in therapy. It shows up in it gets mixed with other approaches. That's the other way people come across it. Oh, my therapist used it with me, or my body worker, my shiatsu practitioner talked about it, so it gets mixed in with other approaches very easily. So sort of on like intuitively, solo, in a pair, or just mixed with other approaches. Those are the main ways people use it.
Thank you. How did you come across it? How were you introduced to the method?
Kind of by chance, really. I was on a retreat, a Buddhist retreat. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning, I spent many years teaching meditation, and as part of that, of course, I went on retreat regularly. And it was just after my mum had died. And I think that was kind of significant. I was in a process of real deep grief, and the teacher of the retreat just, knew I was having a hard time and said, "Well, have you ever heard of focusing?" And I went, "No, not really." He said, "Oh, well, it's about listening to your body." And I didn't think about much of it. But then later, that evening, and I had this dream, and I woke up with these words: focusing. I must learn focusing. I completely knew I needed to know it. It was like somebody giving me, I don't know, like a new ingredient or something, or a key to a door I'd never been in. And so I went back to him the next day and I said, "Tell me more about this focusing." And he gave me a book, and I was like, wow, this is exactly what I needed. For years I've basically been running away from my experience through meditation. Isn't it interesting? Through meditation, I didn't really want to feel what I felt. I wanted to not feel it and get into a calm place. With some success that happened, but mostly that doesn't help. And yeah, so luckily that teacher read the book and really liked the practice, and shared it with me, and immediately clicked. Something I knew I needed to learn it. It was almost like a 180-degree turn in my experience in terms of how I was with myself. How I related to myself. Yeah.
That was really powerful to hear the contrast for you with sort of the ordinary kind of meditation that you were doing. I think people, a lot of people really struggle with meditation, don't they? And especially
Yes.
people who are carrying quite a lot of trauma
Exactly.
and
Yes.
distress. The idea of getting into a meditative, switched off state, or focused state with the clarity of the mind seems impossible to reach. So it's interesting to hear you talk about this as an alternative to that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I want to sort of acknowledge, in the last 20 years, our understanding of meditation has come on hugely in mindfulness and trauma, so all this is shifting, but this is like 20 years ago, and people are still kind of sitting there like trying to get concentrated. And yeah, some people found it really helpful. I did to a limited degree, but yeah, it missed the body. I suppose that was the missing piece for me. Oh, I've got a body and I've got an experience, and I'm here to listen. And if I try and run away from it, it won't help. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, you described it as a 180-degree turn, which is quite a big turn, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
So
it didn't happen all at once, but yeah.
No. So how was this discovered then? Who developed this method of work? Where did it come from?
Where did it come from? Yeah. It originates with someone called Eugene Gendlin, and he's a philosopher primarily, and he was really kind of interested in how we know things. How is it we know things? How do we know what we know? And he teamed up with Carl Rogers in the late 50s and 60s and began some research together into why therapy worked for some people and why it doesn't. Some people really make progress, they really make big shifts. Some people, it just doesn't go anywhere. It goes and just kind of stays at a certain level. And what they discovered, apart from some essential factors like the empathy of the therapist and for example, that was always essential. But one of the other most essential factors was the client's relationship to their own experience. And they got to this point where they could hear, even in the first recording of a therapy session, whether someone would make progress or not. They could hear it in how the person was speaking. And the people who made progress were the people who stopped and paused. So they would be speaking and go, I feel really sad about this. And then they go, oh, is it sad? Is it? And they'd pause and they'd kind of go somewhere. And they'd go, no, like betrayed. Oh, yeah, I feel betrayed. And suddenly this next whole other piece would come. Like, yeah, I really feel betrayed. As an example, they'd stop and pause and go somewhere. And then they made progress. And then, of course, they got interested in what is it they're doing when they go quiet in there. What is it? And you see this in ordinary conversation, even, or even maybe as I'm speaking, sometimes I'm stopping and trying to find the right words. People will go and do something, and that is what they notice, and then they began to find out what happened in there, and then they kind of wondered, well, how can we teach this to people? How can we teach this to people? Because it clearly makes a massive difference. This capacity to be able to do that, and from there, focusing as a sort of formal method was born. And Eugene Gendlin started to run groups in Chicago called changes groups, and he would teach focusing to people for free, and people started to learn it. And so it existed within therapy, but it actually went way beyond that as well. And he wanted to in the end teach it. Anyone could come along to his groups and learn the practice, and that sort of way of doing it has existed ever since. A kind of free, if you like, a kind of open invitation to learn it. Yeah.
Thank you. In prison work, we talk, perhaps not so much now as we used to, but talked a lot about readiness for treatment.
Right.
And a lot of people couldn't get into treatment because they weren't considered to be ready for treatment. Do you think that might apply to this? Could anyone be ready, or does one need to be in a kind of transitional emotional state, as you suggested you were after your mother died?
Yeah, no, definitely don't have to be in that state. No, I mean, I was kind of ripe for it, for sure, at that moment, because it was all there, it was all that. But yeah, but so no, that wouldn't be a prerequisite. But I think there are some people who find it hard, and I think or it needs a bit of more fine tuning and delicacy, if you like certainly with trauma. If there's a lot of trauma in the body, people don't want to go, not just into the body. They just don't really necessarily, for very good reason. It's hard to contact their own experience. So, that might need a bit more smaller, broken down steps to sort of get used to that inner environment where they can contact what they're feeling. So, I've certainly had clients like that where we started off working together and it's become clear that actually it's focusing is too quick or too, because it's quite powerful methodology, it's quite, so, and they're like, actually, I need to pause, need to go a bit slower and maybe have a bit of a more of a sort of supported environment where I'm doing this. So yeah, I mean, that's one example. I don't think it's a tool for everybody at all times, but I certainly think it's a tool for most people at some point. A lot of people who've maybe the people who have had trauma eventually might come to focusing. In that's quite common. People have been exploring trauma for quite a while, or been in therapy, and then they're like, I need to do more. I need to do more of this, or they've been talking in therapy age, and they need to get into their body. So it's often a bit of the whole journey of healing, but not the whole piece. That's certainly been my experience and others. Yeah, I like to describe it as like an essential ingredient, but not necessarily the first one you'd come across. Yeah.
Great, Naomi.
Yeah, so Peter, what are the benefits of focusing, do you think? What is it that you particularly notice about its usefulness?
Yeah, I think in a world where we're sort of, I'll say something more general, and I'll say about my own experience too. But this is what people often report back, coming from my courses and learning it, that often people are like overwhelmed by their thoughts and feelings. They don't really know how to sort of be with all of that, or overwhelmed by so many opinions out there about how they should be, how feeling, how or what to do. How do you sort of navigate all of that stuff, all this stuff coming at us from outside? And a lot of people find it's like they're finding their own voice, or they're coming home to themselves. That's the sort of language they might use at the end of, like, oh wow, I just feel at home in myself now, and I didn't feel that before. So it really enables people to kind of navigate their own emotional life and understand that, but also navigate finding what's next for them. So they can use their body to kind of, oh, this decision is right, and that one's, oh, that's not right, or like, or which therapist, or which methodology, or even like which house to live in, or which person to be with. Like using it as a sort of compass. So that's definitely for me been a benefit. So like then yeah, there's some real deep emotional processes, emotional healing that people go through, and I've gone through myself, of where it's really cleared, like cleared grief that was stuck in the body, or other issues being triggered. For me, it's helped massively with getting triggered in my family situation, for example. I used to, and it isn't that long ago, like really lose my temper quite a lot, and with focusing, I began to understand where those triggers came from, and became more compassionate towards myself, and now I'm not losing it so often, hardly at all, which is great. And the other thing I really love to share is this thing about the inner critic. Most of us have got terrible critics in our minds telling us how terrible we are and we're worthless. And for me, it's like that's 95% gone. Sometimes it crops up, but not for long. But they used to really dog me, and really terrible sort of self-worth. Really, I used to feel I was worthless and nobody loved me, and those kind of feelings, which really come from the younger parts of ourselves. Really, I say. Have just sort of dissolve, maybe the right word, but just don't happen. So a kind of a self-compassion has come from it. And that's just not me. Lots of people feel that. It's very compassionate practice. So to name a few. There are other benefits too, but maybe other people. They also, you can use it in so many ways. People also use it for work creatively, like doing creative projects, kind of helping them find new ideas. So it's not just about problems and difficulties. So yeah, that's one of the things I like about it. It's very sort of faceted. You can use it in lots of different ways. Yeah.
Sounds like it could really help people strengthen their awareness of what's going on with their interoceptive state.
Oh yeah, definitely, yes.
And really harness that as a tool to use to make decisions, or have a better understanding of what's unsettling them in their life.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yes, definitely. Because underneath our sort of what we our kind of our thought processes and our reactive thought processes around something, there is this whole wealth of information. That's kind of what focusing points to. And if we come into relationship with that, if we listen to that, there's so many other things can happen more easily. Another example I could give is getting triggered. When we get triggered, often we get caught in that really easily, and then we might lash out or say something. But if you're more aware of that, you can catch it and go, oh, okay, wow, part of me is really triggered. I wonder, can I be with that? I may not be saying this out loud and just verbalizing it, but then you have a little gap between you and it. So that's right, and all that's happening in that interoceptive inner kind of level, really. Yes, exactly.
You mentioned that this comes really from the work of Eugene Gendlin, and whose book was called Focusing, I believe. Do you teach and practice it in the same way that Gendlin did, or have you made adaptations to make it more your own practice in terms of your way of teaching it?
Yeah, I have. I originally did learn the 6 steps, more or less, which is how it's written in his book. Yes, the 6 steps of focusing, and And then I came across another kind of focusing, which is called interrelationship focusing, and they have a slightly different methodology with like 4 steps, which worked slightly better for me. It was simpler sort of journey, simpler sort of model, and I adapted that even slightly. So yeah, and and across the focusing world, you can come across a variety of different maps. Really, I mean, they're all really maps to help you get there. I saw Gendlin speak a couple of times in the early 2000s, and he said this one. He said this once. Oh, I wish I'd never written that book, focusing, because everyone thinks focusing is something you do in 6 steps, and it's not something you do in 6 steps. It might be, but you could do it in however many steps works. And this is something I really love about it. It's very it's not this kind of solidified trademark technique. It is something that is it's a living process. You're inviting people into a living process, so you can do that even without calling it focusing. But you certainly don't have to do it in 6 steps. You can do it in all sorts of different ways, and there are loads of teachers out there taking this into all sorts of different realms where it isn't like that. I mean, the 6 steps are actually very beautiful in the way they have their own kind of real kind of directness to them. But yeah, that's not the only way. And we find a language that works for us, for sure.
What kind of people do you work with? What kind of people? How do people find their way to you? Is a particular kind of person that seeks you out?
Yeah, I think typically it's sort of people who are on some kind of journey of personal development, and or people who are offering that to other people. So you've got a bit of both people there for their own benefit, their own journey, or like therapists, counselors, body workers, and people who've come across focusing. Maybe they've heard about it, or they just want to get more in touch with their body. They've been doing talking therapies for years, and they want to add this piece in, to their work. But yeah, nearly always there is a sort of personal element. People want to be more in touch with what they know at a deeper level. They want to be more connected to what their body knows, and then they're looking for a way to do that. Yeah, I mean, for a long time I practiced or taught in the Buddhist community, because that was my tradition I sort of grew up in. And so meditators, people who are sort of in the spiritual journey also show up on my courses, and that's it's a great combination. All those things, they fit really well with focusing. Because they're contemplative. I guess there is some. Again, this touches a connection with meditation. That focusing is a sort of contemplative in practice, although it doesn't always look that way necessarily, but there is some, the slowing down, the noticing. Yeah.
So I can't blame anyone else for my ignorance, Peter, but it doesn't seem to me that it's terribly well known as a method.
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
I know, I saw this question. I wish I knew the answer because I think, but because I think it's so valuable. It's in a way it's a shame that it's not so well known, because it's such a valuable thing, and we've spoken a bit about why that is. But I think because you can do it with your peers, that's one of the reasons why it's so valuable. But I think because it does take a bit of time to learn. It isn't an instant. For many people, it takes a little while, a few weeks of practice to really settle in. So there is, that's one reason. It's not like kind of instantaneous. I mean, the other reason is I think there's been a bit of lack of research in it in terms of the research of the self, this kind of peer practice method of it. There's research in other areas, but that hasn't been well researched, and I think that would be great to have a bit of research base behind it. So it's just sort of, that's another reason. I think it's also been kind of, I mean, Gendlin's work is all over the place in the trauma world, for example. You mentioned, didn't you, Naomi? It's something in the tradition, the practice you taught in. Were taught in. So, and you read Peter Levine's book, Waking the Tiger, on trauma, one of the earliest books on trauma. He credits Gendlin for his work. So it's become sort of, it's a lot. There's even a recent book by Steve Biddulph, who's a parenting expert, and he's now teaching it, calling it something slightly different. So it crops up in a lot of places, but it's somehow lost its own identity, in that somehow it doesn't get its own place. But yeah, I think there are some there's some other things I don't know why exactly it's not so well known. It's a bit of a mystery to many people in the focusing world, not just me, yeah.
So there's not too much research, you say. How would you sort of measure benefit or progress?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there is more research in the therapeutic context because that's where, in a way, that's where it's spent a lot of its time, and I think it's an easier environment to do that research in. It's a much more controlled environment. But yeah, so what was your question? Like, how would you measure that? Do you mean how would you sort of?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I call it be outcomes. I mean, this is
I,
really, yeah, Karen, you're going
I
to
was
say
just
something.
going to say that's always a difficult question. It's awful
Sure.
being asked that. It's like being asked how does Trump win presidential
I know.
elections?
Sure, yeah,
It's a big
I know.
question.
Yeah,
Who knows?
who knows? Yeah. Well, I get, I'm not a researcher, so I wouldn't. No, but it would be some kind of outcomes. How they would be different over time. That's how you would measure the sort of how if focusing works or not. And I measure it in the sense of, well, it works. It works for me, and it's worked for all the people many people I've taught, not everybody. Um, there's something most people get it, even if they find it hard. They get the idea of it quite quickly, like they feel its potential because suddenly they're feeling things they never felt before, and they're suddenly in touch with things they've wanted to touch for a long time and haven't been able to, or sort of letting go of griefs they've had for years. It can be very quick in terms of showing people that it works in a certain way, even though it might take a while. Yeah.
I wondered if there's
Yes.
something about trying to capture that sense of um, of shifting,
Hmm.
from a state of unease to a
Yes.
sense of being more at peace in some way. So there still might be
Yes.
pain there, but I think
Yeah.
my experience is that there's a sense of something easing up just by virtue of being named or some
Exactly.
understanding, but something seems to create a settling and then it's possible to stick with that emotion that's there because of that
Yes.
settling, whereas we can be almost fighting that feeling at the start of the exercise. I don't know if that's your
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, in a way, that echoes that sort of turning around I spoke of. Like for a long time, fighting my experience of anxiety and like trying to make it go away, but then like learning to turn towards it, and particularly not try and think myself out of it. Like, but can it feel okay? What is it? And then know, oh, it's a part of me. That's an important. Something in me is anxious. Part of me is anxious. Where do I notice that inside? And I begin to sort of feel it in a certain place in the body and describe it. And as I do that, I get to know a bit more about what it's anxious about. Oh, okay. Oh, it doesn't want me to like. Oh, I don't want to look stupid. Oh, wow. I didn't know I was worried about that. And then it can ease, and then I can stay with it a bit longer. And like you say, it settles. It's really the power of listening. We know this from our experience. So when we really feel listened to by somebody and really feel met and heard, all of we even though it can be a little challenging to be seen, it's like a relief, isn't it? Oh, we can be ourselves. Like here we are. Like doesn't it? And we're sort of offering that same relationship to what we feel inside, and that's very transformative. Yeah.
Okay, Naomi.
Well, I was going to ask you whether there are any people who found it difficult to do it, particular kinds of people, for instance, are the people who if people have less awareness of what's going on inside, in terms of their interoception, do they
Hmm.
find it more
Hmm.
difficult to do in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we touched on that a little bit earlier around trauma, around if there's a lot of pain in the body. It doesn't mean they necessarily can't, but it might be a bit more of a subtle or a bit more of a kind of guided way into that. I think that's certainly one category of people that would find it tricky. I mean, and I'm really sort of astounded, like how you can translate this methodology. Like there's a whole approach to this, to focusing, where people work with children, uh, young people, and you're not really calling it focusing at all. You're not, oh, let's do this technique.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't do that with with a 5-year-old or 7 or even a 13-year-old. But you can, invite them to notice what they're feeling and maybe draw it. We'll make a movement so there are a lot of adaptations that make it surprisingly adaptable. so even if the body is a hard place to be, you can still use symbols to describe what you're noticing. So I wouldn't want to be. I guess I'm not kind of saying I wouldn't want to be absolute that you could never use it in those circumstances. But there definitely are people who might need something else first, who to help them kind of just be a bit more grounded and more sort of some kind of stability in their nervous system, for example, to be a bit more present. Some of that groundwork might be needed first for certain. Yeah.
Have you come across people using? Do you know of anyone using it with people with intellectual disabilities?
Such as, can you like an example? Might be when you say intellectual.
Well, people. People with intellectual impairment. So I'm just thinking about when I trained as a clinical psychologist. One of the most powerful experiences I had was doing a person-centered therapy placement with people with profound learning disabilities, who, as they were known at the time, and some of them didn't have speech or had very limited speech, and actually just that sense of kind of like a running commentary on observing them, which I guess was communicating the sense of being seen, was quite powerful. Absolutely. With this population, and I imagine that there could be people with intellectual disability who are able to access this. There shouldn't be a block to it.
Oh no, I agree. Yeah, I mean that's not my area of experience or expertise, but certainly I've heard of that. I mean, I think even Gendlin did some work. I think so. I remember this, like with people who are very non-verbal for some reason, and just being with them in this way, it makes a huge difference. Where we're embodying what we could call presence, compassionate presence with somebody. With our bodies, we're just being there, and we might be reflecting a bit back about what they were saying and what they were just gently being with them. Definitely, that's there's a lot of potential there. I'm sure. It's just such a compassionate way to be with oneself, and that's been my experience. I mean, one of the things I want to share actually is how much it's helped me listen to other people, just in my friends and family. I don't know if I was a bad listener before, but I'm certainly a much better listener now. So I'm not doing anything formal, but I'm able to be with them and be curious about how they are. Oh, how is it for you? And listen to them in a way that changes the relationship, which is interesting, isn't it? Because there is a shift there, even in how we're listening. Yeah. So that does change something, how we are with somebody. Yeah. Yeah. Carry on.
One of the really interesting things I think about focusing is the way it's offered up in quite an egalitarian way. In particular, I think the work of the International Focusing Institute, that they really encourage people to engage with that. Can you say a bit more about that element? You touched on the peer-to-peer support earlier.
Exactly. Yeah. This is again, this is something I really love about focusing, is this emphasis on this peer practice. I do remember it was one of the conferences with Gendlin. I wasn't speaking to him directly, but there was a group speaking, asking him, where he got this model from, and he said, I saw people doing co-counselling. So he took the model of this peer method from co-counselling, which obviously was around at the time, and borrowed it, and that's great. There's this, there is this possibility that you could do it with not with everybody, but with a peer. You don't need to pay an expert, although some expert might be needed in some situations. But you can do it, and you can be supportive to each other. He even talks, I think, in his focusing book, or certainly in his interviews, around making therapy free. So that this practice, he clearly saw how helpful it was when he started teaching it, could become free. Well, it is free, and making a therapeutic sort of process, let's not say therapy, but a therapeutic process, free and available. That's definitely part of the vision of the Focusing Institute and the focusing organisation that I'm part of. It's definitely it's really woven into the sort of focusing method, and that's why it's never really been trademarked. Where it's been free to teach. Once you learn it yourself, you can go off and practice it. It's even offered free, and of course many people charge for their courses. But once you've got it, you've got a skill for life. It's great like that. And so I think it's kind of really woven into the teaching of it and the practice of it and the structure is this sense of you can learn it and have it as a skill for life, and that, so that really appeals to me.
Something that feels very generous.
Yes.
Very generous spirited.
Exactly.
About it, and I would really encourage people to search out the organisation, because there is so much on offer. But it in this day and age, when there is mass need for mental health interventions, a lot of people on very long waiting lists, or not able to afford therapy. For some people, it represents a good alternative. But
Definitely.
just thinking about that large unmet need for additional support, is this something that you think could have some utility for prisons, psychiatric hospitals, waiting lists for NHS treatment, for therapy?
Yeah, some, if not all of those. I think there's a great potential there, because of this, the way in which once you learn it, you can just practice it with someone else who knows it. You've got this kind of, support. This it's for me, it's something I do once, twice a week with people. It's essential for my well-being, and it keeps me in a good state, so it's it's not just kind of for dealing with the big difficult things like grief, but it's every day sort of ongoing support where we can go and be listened to by somebody, and then they listen to us. And so we're really sharing what's important and what matters to us. When we share what's happening in our body, it's not just our being, we're often sharing really significant and important things, and having a place you can do that's kind of freely available, not just for 6 weeks, or not just and that might come in many months' time, I think it's got a lot of potential. I mean, I wish I had more resources to go down that avenue. That's something I've often thought of doing, offering it in some kind of other environments where it's actually more acutely needed, because there's a lot of people waiting for, in a way, just to be heard, just to have someone hear what's really going on for them. And so, and another wish for it to be more well known is that it comes from there. I think if there's a say. I think. Go on. Yeah.
No.
Well, I was going to say something around there. It does need care, because it is a powerful method. So to create safety, how to work in pairs does need a little bit of practice. But once you get the hang of it, actually, it works really well. People, I know projects where I've worked in hospices. In South Africa, someone's done some work in hospices. It's been taught in Afghanistan, in communities, in everyday communities under sort of mental health umbrella. So just everyday people, either in quite traumatic, certainly PTSD sort of environments, have been using it. There's a place in there's a Palestine trauma center that where they've been using focusing as well as other approaches to help there. I mean, also it's changed massively in the last few months, but that's still going, not as a sort of physical entity, but as a group of people. So you can take it into quite difficult situations, and it can be really powerfully helpful. So you
What advice would you give to anyone? What advice would you give to anyone who's interested to get more involved? Is there any, what do you offer? We'd obviously share a link to your website, and I would encourage people to read your book, The Way of Curiosity, which is a really nice, accessible read. But is there anything else you could suggest for people who might be interested to find out more?
I mean, the way I came across it was through reading a book, and it's not really necessarily the best way to learn it. I mean, I say it as a writer myself. I needed to do a course in the end, but my first impact, the first impact I had of reading is like, wow, this is amazing. I need to learn this. That's a great resource. So there are many other books as well as mine out there, and there's lots of free resources. There's free resources on my website. It's little kind of 5-minute guided audio. On one of my teachers' websites, Anwaiza Cornell, she has like free courses that you can sign up for. There's demonstrations on YouTube. You can download handouts on people's websites. I suppose it's just getting a taste of it. Somehow getting a taste of it, I think, is important. If that's some kind of guided free thing, or reading a book, and then it's sort of, okay, how could you learn it? How can you learn it? There's courses, typically people do some kind of 5-week course or a weekend course. You can pick up the basics pretty quickly. You don't need to spend loads of time and money on it. I've got a weekend course coming up soon, so you could, and then you've got it. You can run with it. That's the great thing. And then you might want to learn a bit more later on, but to get the basics in place isn't a lot of resources for most people. But I think I'd really encourage people to try and get a taste of it, either through some kind of guided process or an experiential session with somebody or a course or something. If reading about it and it sort of awakens something, that's what happened to me. Like, right, I need to do this. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Peter.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you, Peter. That was a great conversation, and I've really learnt a lot. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, pleasure. Great. Good. Thanks very much. Thanks so much for inviting me. Great.